Moving away from just color to talk more broadly about mapping in general, I just want to introduce the idea of principles of graphical excellence. So the point is that complex ideas need to be communicated with clarity, precision, and efficiency. The general idea of creating the best map you can is to give the viewer the greatest number of ideas in the shortest time with the least ink in the smallest space. So basically, just keep it simple. To work towards graphical excellence, the idea is to maximize the data to ink ratio. So more data, less stuff. Don't put ornate north arrows on your map. Don't include things that don't add to what you're trying to show. You want to erase non-data ink within reason. So, you need to have context, but they don't need every last little detail. It's also important to have clear and thorough labeling to prevent any sort of ambiguity or distortion. You want to make sure that the labels are concise, clean, interpretable. They need to make sense. You don't want to have two things that have very similar labels that can confuse people. You want to minimize chart junk, so don't put on unnecessary labels or unnecessary text, unnecessary grid lines, things like that. It's really important to consider whether map elements are even necessary. So do you need a scale bar on every map? If the map is of a very familiar region, maybe not. If you're making a world map that shows all the continents, you don't really need a scale bar. For one, if you're using the Mercator projection or something like that, scale varies as you go north or south of the equator, so the scale bar is only valid for a very small portion of that. But also, people are generally familiar with the world, so you don't need to show the full thing. North arrow, is it necessarily the most important feature on a map? Generally speaking, no. North is commonly up on the map, so in those cases, you can either have a small north arrow or no north arrow at all. If you're making a map where north is not up, it's very important to put that on the map to convey to the map reader that, hey, this map doesn't follow your preconceived assumptions or expectations of the direction. The best maps can be interpreted quickly. So we're looking at this map. How predictable is weather in the US? And it just has one gradation of colors, less to more, and you can see that generally speaking, the West Coast, especially the Southwest Coast and Hawaii, have the most consistently predictable weather, whereas the northern Midwest has the least predictable weather. And they put down the station with the least and most predictable weather, and that's it. They leave it at that. They don't label the states. They don't put a name by every single weather station or city in the map. They don't add any more information than you need. If someone wants to follow up and figure out what they mean by more or less predictable, maybe they can have a link to more information, but you don't need to include any more than is necessary on the map. So it's important to consider what's known as the visual hierarchy. So this is the idea that our perception is influenced by the order in which we see things. So the visual hierarchy refers to the relative importance of different features implied by the layout on the map. For instance, the title is essentially the most important element on the map, so it should be the largest font on your map, and generally speaking, you want it at the top. If you tuck your title away down at the bottom and you make it the smallest text on the map, it's not going to be obvious that it's the map title. Whereas, again, the north arrow, generally speaking, if north is up, isn't that important. You don't need a really big ornate north arrow. If you want to have a north arrow on the map while north is up, that's fine, but make it small, tuck it away in the bottom corner somewhere. So the order that we see features on the map really has an influence on how we perceive them. So now I'm just going to go through some examples of bad mapping, bad cartography, and then use that as a jumping off point to sort of discuss what you can do to make a more effective map. So this is an example of a really, really bad map that I found on Reddit. The map is attempting to show the diversity of dialects of different languages in North America. And while there's some fairly interesting information on the map, and it's clear that whoever made the map put a lot of effort into the work that they put into the map in distinguishing all these different regions, the map is essentially impossible to interpret. You have to study it and study it and study it to figure out what any of it means. It's so jumbled and complicated. There's so much text. All the text is very small. The color schemes don't work well. There's just so many different things on the map all at once. It's impossible to tell what's going on. And so this is what I mean when I say like the best maps are able to be interpreted quickly. This one, you can spend 20 minutes on it and still not figure out everything that's going on. So I'm just going to go through step by or point by point some examples of poor cartography, bad mistakes on a map that make it difficult to interpret, using an example of tsunami risk assessment in Port Alberni. So this is what you're going to be doing for lab this week. You're going to do a risk assessment for Port Alberni. So I'm just showing some examples of really bad mapping in this region to give you an idea of what not to do when making your map for lab 3 or more broadly in general. So if we look at this map, one of the first things you might notice is that there's a really poor use of the map space. There's lots of wasted white space near the top, and the map isn't centered on the area of interest. So when you create a layout in ARC, you're given that map sheet. The idea is to try and maximize your use of that map sheet. Fill it in, don't have a bunch of extra white space. If you're not going to fill it in, use a smaller map sheet. And you want the thing to be balanced, right? Imagine like an arbitrary seesaw and you want to put the map on it. You want it to sit in the middle perfectly. You don't want it to fall to one side or the other. This map has a really poor color choice. So generally speaking, one, you want to try and stick to gradients of 1 or 2 colors if you're doing anything that implies some sort of ranking. But also red-green color blindness is really common. So you want to avoid red-green or red-orange-green gradations in the color schemes. Again, if you're unsure about what choices to pick for a color scheme, check out Color Brewer. It's a good option. Not all the map elements are visible on this map. So there are things that are listed on the legend that you can't actually see on the map. For instance, the highway and the roads are covered up by the properties layer, so you can't actually see them. So it's important to make sure that everything's in the right order on your table of contents so that they're actually displayed on the map. There's a DEM on this map, a digital elevation model, but it's covered up by everything. The text on the map is also really, really bad. I mean, look at the title font. It's really, really small. Does not imply that it's the most important thing. The legend text is larger than the title text, which is something you never want to do. Not only is it small, but it doesn't mean anything. Lab 1 map. Like that, I mean, doesn't mean anything at all. It would be much better to have a concise, descriptive title, like Port Alberni Tsunami Risk Assessment. You want to avoid using things like abbreviations, especially if they're uncommon. So in the legend, it says SUF type for roads. That doesn't mean anything. Road type would be better. And the abbreviation HWY, it's pretty obvious what it means, but it's not that much extra text to just type out highway. So unless you're really constrained, there's no need to abbreviate it. You want to make sure that the text is descriptive. You want to make sure that it's free of grammatical errors. Like the layer names don't have spaces in between the words. So properties and zone should be properties space in space zone. It should probably say inundation zone because that's more descriptive. You want to make sure that you get rid of all the underscores and things like that. They're easy enough to edit out. It's these nitpicky little details that make the difference between effective and not effective visualization. If you look at this north arrow, it's just like ridiculously ornate. My philosophy with north arrows is less is more. So less up is not north, or If up isn't north, you need a bigger north arrow to convey that. Otherwise, it can be small and tucked away or left off entirely, depending on where you're looking at. And generally, regardless of that, you want to avoid using all the different ornate, silly north arrow options that ARC provides you and just stick to the simple arrows. Usually, again, following that visual hierarchy, the north arrow is better placed at the bottom. So the way we read things, the way we read maps, is similar to the way we read like a page in a book, where you start at the top and you work your way down, and usually you start on the left side and scan to the right, unless maybe you're like reading in Arabic, or that's the way you learn to read, then maybe you read from the opposite direction, right to left. But generally, top to bottom still holds to convey the importance. So you have the more important things at the top, the less important things at the bottom. So the title at the top, the map in the middle, the other stuff, legend, north arrow, scale bar, generally speaking at the bottom. Now these aren't steadfast rules, they're more like guidelines, but generally you can stick to that. So the scale bar, another important one, it's in the wrong units. So we're in Canada, we use the metric system, don't use imperial units on your legends unless you're making a map for like somewhere in the US. It's also missing the name, the affiliation, the source. It's very important when making a map to say who you are. Like you want people to know who made the map. You want to know who they worked for, or at least like what organization they're associated with, why they made the map. And you want to know the data sources. Where did the information come from? So it's important to be transparent about the mapping that you're doing so that people can, fully assess whether the map is trustworthy, why someone might have made the map. Are there some biases they might have that are associated with the organization they're part of? And then the legend here has lots and lots of issues. For one, this is a bit of a pet peeve of mine. Don't title your legend legend. It's just redundant. The map reader knows it's a legend. You don't need to tell them that. You can give your legend a title if it needs one, but generally speaking, it doesn't. You can just list the categories of the different layers and layer names and things like that. You want to avoid any unnecessary text. So again, there's things on this legend that just don't make sense. Oftentimes, ARC by default puts like the layer name and then like the subtype and then the different categories. And you can edit some of that out because some of it just becomes redundant. Usually want to get rid of the underscores. Again, they don't really add anything. They're just unnecessary. You want to make sure that all the legend entries are meaningful. So for instance, in this map in Lab 3, you're going to be working with some property data that has different zoning codes. And so you don't want to use land use code 1, land use code 2. What does that mean to the map reader? You have to give them the actual category. Is it residential or commercial or industrial, or is it a park? You want to avoid having entries like sometimes ARC will default to having this all other values within carets. Edit that so that it looks a bit more meaningful. Say all other property types and have it, be more descriptive without these sort of weird symbols. So this is an example of a more effective visualization. Now, there's no perfect map. There's always aesthetic choices that you could make to make things better. But this is much more effective than this at conveying the risk of tsunamis for Port Alberni. So the area of interest makes up most of the map space. It's got name, affiliation, all of that. It's more meaningful. Legend entries, so I didn't put a legend title. I added a border around the legend with a background to make sure that it pops out from the rest of the map to make sure that it's more easily distinguishable. All of the legend entries are meaningful. Everything's in the proper order on both the legend and the map. Proper sizing and placement of map elements. The map is actually focused on the area of interest. So with this map, it's cutting off a significant portion of the area that we're looking at, which is obviously bad. You want to show everything that you need to show, but you don't need to zoom out more than you need to. The color choices are more pleasing. It's generally speaking easier for colorblind folks to read. Now you will notice that on here there is both red and green, and sometimes it's impossible to get away with having a map that has no red and green on it. But the point is that these are in separate categories, so it's not the same issue here. you can't use red and green to gradate and distinguish between within the same layer, right? So you wouldn't want to use red for multifamily and green for single family instead of using just shades of green to convey the difference here, because multifamily versus single family is different, but they're the similar type. And then I'm using red for a totally different entity. So I'm not saying that you can't put red and green on the same map, but what I'm saying is you need to be cognizant of how some people might have a difficult time distinguishing between it if it's in a situation where the differences between the colors are important. On this map, they can still tell that there's lines representing the buffers around the warning towers, and they can still see the shades representing the zoning types. And lastly, the title is large and descriptive. So it lets us know quickly and concisely what we're looking at and what the map is about. These are just guidelines. Cartography is an art. There are no steadfast rules to it. There's just stylistic guides or principles that you generally want to stick to, but rules are made to be broken, right? So feel free to play around with your styling. You just want to be able to justify the choices you make. So if you make a map and you put no thought into the color choices or the layout or any of that, then chances are it's not going to be effective visualization. You want to sit there and think about, what can I do to make this map effective and accessible for as many people as possible? And lastly, I'll just say that not all spaces really want to be mapped. So sometimes you need to make aesthetic compromises to make an effective map. So a good example of this, for instance, is trying to make a map of the country of Chile. It's very, very long and very, very narrow. So it's pretty difficult to put the full country in one map and have it be at a scale that's easily readable by the map reader. So you might need to break it into separate panes and display them side by side, which is a technique you often see used for mapping that country, in order to have things zoomed up with a high enough resolution that you can actually read it. So even though it might not, be as aesthetically pleasing as displaying the full country in one, it's the only way that you can effectively create a visualization of it on one sheet of paper.